What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks not at Starbucks Shanghai, but at Nerd Tees, and welcome to week 2 of season 2 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2019 CFL season. Off to a bit of a slow start in week 1. I'll be the first one to admit that. Only went 1-3 straight up in the games, which is the pretty well polar opposite of where we want to be by the end of the season. 1-3 straight up's only 25%. Hold your nose on that one. Not great. But for the fact that I only went 1-3 straight up, I actually think it's not too terrible that I went 2-2 against the spread and 2-2 on the over-unders. Usually, if you miss the game straight up, you're going to have a hard time with the betting picks. So the fact that I went 500 in those, despite only going 1-3 straight up, I wound up 5-7 for the week. That's only 41.67%. It's low. It's definitely low. It's not at all where we want to be. We kind of want to increase that by, 20 percentage points. Luckily, that was only week 1. And before we take a look into the week 2 games, I kind of wanted to drop dime a little bit. I'm doing something a little bit different this year. I've never actually done it before. I'm playing CFL fantasy football. So for those that don't know, CFL fantasy football, it's done in a daily fantasy sports format where you have a budget for your week. I believe it's $40,000, and each team, each player costs a certain amount of money. So you pick your lineup week to week, you score points based on how they do in real world games. I am in the official Atlantic Schooners CFL Football League, which is very exciting. Atlantic Schooners, I can't wait. I can't wait until they're my team and I drape myself in Schooners merch. And they probably suck for the first 5 years, but that's okay. So there's 48 people in this official Atlantic Schooners Fantasy Football League. I currently sit in 10th place based on how I did in week 1. I had 113.2 points in week 1, so obviously that's my overall on the season as well. My MVPs from my week 1 lineup, definitely Montreal wide receiver BJ Cunningham, 7 catches, 96 yards, and a tutty in week 1. 22.6 fantasy points. And also shout out to Winnipeg running back Andrew Harris. Carried the ball 16 times, 148 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but did add 5 catches for 27 yards receiving. He finished just 1/10 of a point lower than BJ Cunningham did at 22.5. And I think what I'll do as well in episodes moving forward is I'm going to show you my lineup for the upcoming week. So my week 2 lineup is on the screen right now. Take a peek at that. If you're interested in playing CFL fantasy football, let me know in the comments section below. I can start putting the link to the Atlantic Schooners League or just the link in general to CFL fantasy football. I can start dropping that link in the description below. Let me know if you're interested. Our week 2 schedule in the CFL looks like this. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, down at least 1 quarterback, if not 2, travel to Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS, victorious last week. The BC Lions travel to Edmonton to take on the Eskimos. Mike Riley's return to Edmonton. And the final game of this week sees the Hamilton Tiger Cats, victorious last week, heading to Toronto. Toronto, of course, had the unfortunate week 1 bye, but Toronto kicks off their season this week. So let's start with that Saskatchewan-Ottawa game. Obviously, 2 teams going in opposite directions. Saskatchewan losing last week. Ottawa on the happy side of a victory against Calgary. Starting with Saskatchewan, again, 23-17 loss last week in Hamilton. Obviously, the big story in that game was Zach Collaros taking that vicious, dirty hit from Simone Lawrence. Zach Collaros is done. He's on the 6-game injured list. Cody Fajardo, or as we like to call him in the CFL chat, Cody Fajita, comes in. He was mostly ineffective in that game. Enter Isaac Harker. Isaac Harker, the 3rd quarterback, came in, actually slung the ball pretty well, despite a couple of picks late in the game. Most noteworthy in that game, I would say, last week is the fact that William Powell is still really good at football. Probably the best player on either side of the field, on either side of offense or defense in that football game. 20 carries, 104 yards, found the end zone in week 1, picking up right where he left off last season. That was, of course, in his Saskatchewan Roughriders debut. Like I say, probably the best player on either side of the football. And you got to imagine that he's the guy that's got the keys now. He's got the keys to the city now that Zach Collaros is done for at least the next 6 games. So, the whole Simone Lawrence thing and Zach Collaros' injury issues. Simone Lawrence has been suspended 2 games by the CFL. I thought that was the right move to make. I thought a multi-game suspension was warranted. It was a vile, fucking dirty hit. I'm not saying it was intentional because they were former teammates. I'm not saying he looked at the situation as like, I'm going to concuss that guy again. And by the way, the team hasn't made it official that he has a concussion. He has a concussion. And I tweeted that football has a disease. And I truly believe that. I love this sport. I really, really love the sport of football, both on the American side and in the Canadian side. I love this damn sport. This sport has a disease. I don't know what the penicillin for it is, but this sport has a disease, and it's that. It's those hits to the head of defenseless runners, defenseless receivers. Guys are seeing not only their careers shortened, potentially their lives. This is Collaros' 3rd concussion, and again, it's not official, but that's what it is. This is his 3rd concussion in 18 months. This is the kind of thing that ends guys' careers. Having that number of concussions in a small period of time, you become more prone to it. You become that kind of person that later in life, like, sees personality changes and things like that. Like, this could be Collaros' career. This could be it. In certain cases like this, especially when I get fired up about stuff, I'm very much on the side of it where it's like, okay, how long is the injured player going to be out? That's how long the offender should be suspended. And I would have been in favor of that at this. If you would have suspended Simone Lawrence for 6 games, and I realize Lawrence is appealing his suspension, but if you would have suspended him for 6 games, I'd have been perfectly fine with it. Coming back to the team side of things now, is Isaac Harker the guy? Because again, he came in, he looked like he could throw the ball really well. He looks like the kind of guy that will have success in the CFL because it looks like he's got himself a strong arm. He came out and he slung the football when he came in. It looks like it's still Cody Fajita's team for now, but if he stumbles, which he's been prone to do, is Isaac Harker the guy? Let's look on the Red Blacks side of things now. Red Blacks with a big victory in week 1, 32-28 in Calgary. So that, again, huge victory for them. 4 interceptions from Dominique Davis, who got the start at quarterback. You got to wonder how long his leash is going to be. Now, yes, he did just go out and beat Calgary. I'm not going to take anything away from him. He beat Calgary, but he also threw 4 interceptions. So, yeah. 3 rushing touchdowns. That was where the game was won for Dominique Davis. It was definitely won with his legs. Propels him to a major upset. Speaking of rushing, running back Moses Madu, and I actually had to take a look at double check the name, make sure I was pronouncing it right. Moses Madu for the Red Blacks going off. 24 carries, 112 rushing yards in that game. Basically matched, or actually went over his 2018 rushing yardage totals for the entire season. So he had himself a monster game. Be interesting to see what he can do if he can have a repeat performance. Also added 6 catches for 28 yards in the receiving game. Red Blacks spreading the ball out very, very well. 4 receivers that had at least 5 catches. RJ Harris, Brad Sinopoli, Caleb Hawley, as well as Moses Madu. Like we said, 4 guys with at least 5 catches. And they had consistent pressure on the defensive side. They sacked Bo Levi Mitchell 3 times. They were in his face all game. And I said this all last season about Bo Levi Mitchell. Get pressure in his face. He's just not the same quarterback. I did think the Red Blacks benefited in that game last week from what was probably the single worst Calgary Stampeders game I think I've ever seen. That might have been the worst Calgary Stampeders team to play a 4-quarter football game in the last 10 years. Like, the Stamps are the real gold standard in this league. So they did benefit from that. I'm still skeptical about this Red Blacks team. I think they're in a good position this week with the quarterback uncertainty with Sasky. So I do think Ottawa wins this football game, especially where the game's in Ottawa. I'm going to take the Red Blacks here to beat Sasky, but I am hedging my bets. Ottawa comes into this game a 5.5-point favorite at home. I just think that's too many. The recipe for an upset is definitely here, especially if we see more Isaac Harker, less Cody Fajita. But I just like Sasky plus 5.5. I think that's too many points. Total in the game is set at 43.5. It certainly was not set at 43.5 when the lines originally came out. But wow, this line has absolutely plummeted, with the news that Collaros is not playing and with certain people. Total is now all the way down to 43.5 points. And in a CFL game, Like 43 and a half points. Like Saskatchewan without Zach Collaros for all but 3 plays in that first game still scored 17. If both sides score 17, that's 34. You only got to get to 44. So 43 and a half points is just way, way, way too few as far as I'm concerned for a CFL game. I realize that defenses tend to be a little bit better, this time of year before the offenses takes a little while for them to catch up. But 3 of the 4 games last week would have gone over this total, and the only one that didn't was the one that had the 2 quarterback injuries in it. So I'm going to take the over here. I'm going to try to exploit a low number. We're going to go over 43 and a half points in Saskatchewan, Ottawa. Let's go to Edmonton now. Lions and Eskimos meeting here in week 2. On the Lions side of things, they dropped a 33-23 decision against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers last week. The Lions get absolutely dominated in the run game, and these numbers are ridiculous. Winnipeg puts up 23 carries for 170 yards and a touchdown. The BC Lions put up 4 carries for 4 yards. Also, obviously, BC gets dominated in time of possession by over 10 minutes, 35:06 to 24:54. Tough to win football games that way, even with Mike Riley. Speaking of Mike Riley, obviously he was the primary contributor in this game for BC, but a massive 5 catches and 153 yards for wide receiver Brian Burnham. He's had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons in the CFL. I don't think this guy gets talked about quite enough as being, a pretty upper echelon guy in the CFL. Certainly proved it in week 1. The Lions commit 5 turnovers in that game in week 1 and hold on to that thought because it's a bit of a recurring theme, but they did stay disciplined. They only took 6 penalties in that game, 50 penalty yards. That's certainly doable on a week-to-week basis, and they absolutely owned the pass game in this game with the exception of Riley's 2 interceptions. But again, if you're not running the ball, what else is Riley supposed to do? He had 39 pass attempts. He's got to do everything. The Eskimos, meanwhile, began the post-Mike Riley era with a victory 32-25 over Montreal, and this was my upset pick from last week. Didn't exactly work out, but hey, at least Montreal covered the spread. Super efficient game from Trevor Harris in his first game with Edmonton, 75+% through 3 passing touchdowns. Trevor Harris had himself an excellent football game, as well as CJ Gable, 7.7 yards per carry on the ground for the Eskimos, 154 rushing yards. Gable had himself a hell of a game. The Eskimos also saw a 2-touchdown performance from wide receiver Kenny Stafford that matches his touchdown totals from each of the last 3 seasons. But Kenny Stafford is a guy that can make some plays, and with a guy like Trevor Harris, who is going to spread the ball out quite a bit, obviously is going to have his favorite target, but he's going to spread the ball out quite a bit. Kenny Stafford could be one of those underrated guys going to have himself a hell of a year. The Eskimos poured on 600 yards of total offense in that football game. Montreal's defense didn't exactly look the way I hoped that they would look in week 1, but their second half defense kind of left something to be desired. They kind of let Montreal back into that football game, as did the 5 turnovers, which we talked about with BC as well. So neither one of these teams are all that high on ball security. 5 turnovers, and they committed 12 penalties, 118 yards in penalties. That could be a difference maker in this football game if Edmonton can't clean up their discipline issues. So question, is this what the BC Lions are going to be? Are they going to be a team that just doesn't run the football, like ever? Because it wasn't a matter of game flow. This was a close game. It was a 3-point game at the half. This was a close game all throughout. So the fact that you only ran the football 4 times tells me you're not committed to running the football, like at all. And if they're not committed to running the football, it's really tough for me to pick them. Mike Riley is more than capable of winning football games entirely on his own, but if you're going to ask him to do that every single week, sometimes it's going to falter. It's worth pointing out, too, Mike Riley as a starting quarterback in Edmonton last season, only 2-7 on the road. So despite the fact that they're going into Edmonton and it's essentially probably feels like a home game for him, he ain't wearing that jersey anymore, and he was only 2-7 on the road last year. I'm going to take Edmonton here, given that the game is in their barn. Trevor Harris in the offense, very impressive last week. Let's see them do it a second time against a slightly better defense, although BC's defense, not exactly great on the road last year either. Let's take Edmonton at home, Eskies over the Lions. Edmonton favored by 4.5 points here at home. It's less than a touchdown. I kind of felt like BC would keep last week's game a little bit closer. They certainly did not do that. So 4.5 points, it seems like kind of a high number, but I think Edmonton covers this at home. So let's go Edmonton minus the 4.5 points. Total in the game is the highest total of the week, set at 55.5 points right now. I still think it goes over because you've got the combination of what Mike Riley is capable of doing with an offense and what Trevor Harris and the Edmonton offense proved they could do last week. I'm interested to see them have a bit of a repeat performance, 500 some total yards. I think that's possible here. 55.5 points, it's a high number, but it's that high for a reason. I'm going to go over it, over 55.5 points in BC Edmonton. The last game we're going to look at is the Hamilton Tiger Cats traveling to Toronto to take on the Argos. But first, I'm going to take a moment to plug my good friends at NerdTees. Folks, I've been telling you for years now, and the story never changes. Nerdtees.ca is all that and a cup of tea. Nerdtees.ca, use that promo code BWFinest. That is going to save you 15% at checkout. You're going to get free shipping in Canada on any order that is over $75. And with so much good stuff, you'll get to $75 real quick. So free shipping in Canada over that. If you're in the US, 2 clicks of a button, all of a sudden everything is in US dollars. You get an excellent conversion rate on the US dollar. Find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Enjoy your cup. Today's blend, by the way, is cookie dough, and my entire house smells like a bakery. Yes, it is a tea that tastes just like cookie dough. So let's get into our last game of the week here. The Hamilton Tiger Cats traveling to Toronto. Toronto making their season debut. Hamilton coming off the 23-17 victory against Saskatchewan last week. Again, Simone Lawrence's stupidity kind of overshadows what I felt was kind of a fortunate Ticats win. Sasky had their opportunities right at the end of the game, and I don't particularly feel like Hamilton overly outplayed Saskatchewan in that game. The Ticats lost the pass game, was not a very good week for Jeremiah Masoli at all. They lost the run game, they lost time of possession. All of those were in Saskatchewan's favor despite the injury. But it was Hamilton's defense that really came up huge, generating 4 turnovers in that game, including the 2 late interceptions on Isaac Harker. This Ticats team will be better than this. It wasn't a fantastic game for them. They still won. This Ticats team will be better. The offense will be better. Defense looked great, but the offense will definitely be better. They will do so again without Simone Lawrence, who will serve that 2-game suspension, although he is, I think, in the process of appealing it, so who knows? Maybe we even do see him this week. I don't expect it, but you never know. And given that the Toronto Argos have not played a game yet this season, we're going to have to give them the treatment that we gave all of the teams last week and just kind of look at the same sort of criteria, including my biggest question mark for them in their week 1, but actually week 2. Toronto only 2-6 against the East Division last season, but they were 4-5 on their home field, so they were almost at 500 on their home field. That was basically all of their wins last year came at home. They did make 6 key additions in the offseason, 5 of them coming on the offensive side. So this is the big thing with this Toronto team. I expect that they're going to put up points. I really do. Maybe it doesn't happen in their first week because they're still, I'm sure, working on team chemistry and the quarterback situation. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in terms of putting up points. They got some talented pieces on the offensive side. They did lose a couple of key pieces in the offseason, one on offense and one on defense. So again, I don't think that defense is much better than it was last year. And that just dives right into my biggest Toronto's week 1 question mark, and that is, how exactly do the Argos plan on stopping anyone on offense? Granted, they get an opponent that only put up 23 points last week, but that was against what I consider to be a very good to great defense against Saskatchewan. Like, if Hamilton I think this Hamilton team is capable of putting up 30 points a game. So it'll be interesting to see how exactly does Toronto plan on stopping teams like that. Worth pointing out that the Ticats really struggled as marginal favorites in 2018. I think if you look at their games where they were favored by under a touchdown, their ATS record was not very good. I kind of stopped counting at about think it was something like 2-4 or 2-5. So they weren't exactly great as, marginal favorites, which is what they are in this game. But I just look at this as Hamilton's a team with too many weapons against a defense that is virtually nothing, and I didn't see stop anyone last season. So you got to go with Hamilton. You got to go with the team that's actually played. So I'm going to take Hamilton here. Hamilton on the road in Toronto. It's kind of a road game, quote unquote. But I'm going to take Hamilton in this one. Ticats over the Argos. Hamilton, a 3.5-point favorite here on the road heading into Toronto. That's a spot that a lot of people will like to bet the underdog. You're getting 3.5 points on the home team. I got to see Toronto's defense play. That was an all-world bad defense last season. I've got to see that defense play before I can start looking at them like, yeah, they'll cover a 3.5 underdog number. So I got to go Hamilton minus 3.5 in this. So I took 2 of the 3 favorites this week. Total in the game is set at 52 points. I'm actually going to tell you to stay under because, again, a lot of weapons on the Toronto side, but we haven't seen them all play together yet. So who knows what that's going to bring. You got a Hamilton team that only scored 23 points last week. Their offense will be better. Does it necessarily happen this week? I'm not sure. You got a low 50. If this number was a high 40, I'd probably go over on it because I think that's where it's ultimately going to wind up, somewhere 48, 49, something like that. But I got to stay under on the 52. There you go, folks. Your Week 2 episode of the CFL Picks Show is in the books for 2019. Go over the picks here with you one more time. I've got Ottawa beating Saskatchewan at home. I've got Saski, however, hedging my bets, taking Saski plus 5.5 in a game that goes over 43.5 points. I've got Edmonton at home, spoiling Mike Riley's return by defeating the BC Lions. I like Edmonton to cover the minus 4.5 against the spread in a game that goes over 55.5 points. And I like the Hamilton Ticats on the road in Toronto to beat the Argonauts. We're going to go Hamilton minus 3.5 points on the road, and we're going to stay under the 52-point total. There you go, folks. Week 2 episode is in the books. That's it for me. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest, save some money, get the free shipping if you're in Canada, get the conversion if you're in the US, and get yourself some delicious tea. Thank you for watching Week 2. We will see you again for week number 3.